I'm Robert Lang, and my exhibition is Squares, Folds, Life, Contemporary Origami by Robert J. Lang. The project that brought me here is an origami exhibition, and part of that exhibition is the creation of a new monumental piece, or actually monumental pieces, large-scale origami figures based on local wildlife, in this case a heron. So I'll be folding a large flock of flying herons. Well, it's a fairly long process. I start with the idea of the subject, and in this case, I'll take the heron because that's the centerpiece of the installation. I break down the subject into its component parts. What are the important elements that need to be represented by paper? Because in origami, you're folding from one uncut square, so everything in the subject has to be planned out and mapped into the paper. So I take the heron, for example, and well, it's got wings, neck, head, tail. An important part of a heron is when they're flying, they trail their feet behind. So I want to get two long legs coming out of it as well. And to tell you that it's a heron rather than, say, a crane, there's a little tuft on the back of the head. So that's an important part, actually, of the subject. So I take all those parts and I'm going to represent them by different patterns of crease lines and geometric shapes. And so I have to figure out how those different patterns fit into a square of paper, because what part of the paper becomes a wing, what part becomes a tail, how much to allocate for a wing, tail, and so forth. Once I've found that arrangement, then I can construct all of the crease lines, and that gives me a crease pattern. And from that crease pattern, I can fold a shape that we call a base in origami, which is just a geometric shape that has a flap, a loose bit of paper, for every part of the subject. So there's a leg flap, there's a wing flap, there's even the little crest on the head, a flap for that. From that base, then I can go in, and once I've folded the base, I can go in and start adding additional folds that'll shape the parts of the base. So instead of having a big triangular flap for a leg, it turns into the long skinny leg with joints and the appropriate thickness for the length and bulges at the joints and so forth. And after doing that folding shaping, then I end up with the finished fold. Since I'm doing a big figure, I'll design and fold it first in small size, and that's what I did to begin with. And then I'll go back and take the large sheet of paper, in this case a 6-foot square, and fold that giant sheet of paper into the 4-foot wingspan life-size herons that will be put on display here. The herons are made from a custom-made sheet of paper, each one from a sheet of paper about 6 foot square, that's being made by a paper mill in Montreal that specializes in art papers and has the capability of making very, very large sheets of art paper. This paper will probably be made from some kind of a blend of cotton and linen fiber. This project is an evolution of one of the threads of my work. I kind of see that my origami follows several different independent tracks, and I'll follow one thread for a while and then pause and switch over to another. Different threads are insects, birds, geometrics, computed geometric abstracts. But one of the threads is to do large-scale folding, and to do it at an artistic level that's comparable to the small-scale folding. So this is the next stage of evolution of developing large-scale artistic origami. The thing I strive for in almost all of my representational origami is when the person sees the origami figure, they get the same emotional reaction that they would have if they saw the actual subject. But at the same time, they're aware that what they're looking at is a square of paper. And so I want there to be this conflict between their emotional response and their intellectual knowledge of what it is they're looking at. I look at two bodies of work to get inspiration. One is I very much look at the works of other artists, other origami artists and other wildlife artists, painters and sculptors and the like. And I look to them to see, to learn techniques, to see how they've chosen to represent a particular subject with strokes of paint or pieces of stone or wood or folds in paper for the other origami artists. Then the other thing I look to for inspiration is the actual subject themselves, working from pictures if that's all I can get, or working from life if I can get access to the real animals, to try to see, determine for myself what's important in the character of this subject, where are the important lines, and a lot of that you can't even get from pictures. You can see in life the way they cock their head or the way they move in certain ways is what conveys the kind of the emotional response that inspires a response in yourself. And so those are the elements that I look for that I'll then try to replicate with folding. Actually, the best film so I'll take the easy way out. The best film I've seen this year was the movie Enchanted, which we just went to see. It's because it's about the only film I've seen this year, but it was a pretty good one. Profoundly unfulfilled. If I weren't an artist, it's hard to say. It's hard to even picture that, because even though the short answer to if I weren't an artist, what would I be, would be to say, well, I'd be a physicist, because that's what I was for 15 years, and that's what I still do part-time. Except doing physics well is also something of an art. And people often have this idea that science and art are very, very different. But in fact, although science follows a particular discipline, and that's what makes it a science, but to be successful in science, you actually have to be an artist. The development of a hypothesis is a very intuitive thing. The aha moment of recognition that you have a theory or you understand what's happening is very much an artistic event. So even though the short answer would be to say, well, I would be back to being a physicist, I would still be an artist. I wish I had some profound movie to say. Well, there was this, this Russian documentary that, that no one has seen, but that moved me profoundly, yes.